Good evening. Continuing from where we concluded a fortnight ago, starting at the 64th verse. So this remains, of course, within the 6th chapter of Shantideva's Bodhisattvas Way of Life, the chapter on patience. So the 64th verse. Should statues, stupas, and the holy Dharma be reviled or even destroyed, my getting angry makes no sense, as the Buddhas and so forth have not been harmed. Look at the first two lines. Should statues, stupas, and the holy Dharma be reviled or even destroyed? So here we're looking at a couple of verses whereby it's being questioned how one should respond when what one values greatly is criticized, is in the case of a stupa or a statue said to be ugly, or in the case of a text, the meaning is no good, or when any of these are destroyed or burnt. How should one respond when what one values so is being reviled or even destroyed? So this then is how to be patient, how to ensure our mind does not get stirred up and respond with anger. That's what we value in a variety of ways. What we hold as dear, what we value, others may not relate to in the same way and therefore can criticize that. So it can be views and so forth. So this happens quite commonly in society. And then in terms of what we value in terms of the Dharma, particularly in a society such as this, which isn't a predominantly Buddhist society at all, there'll be many people who will look at the religious representations such as statues and tankas and stupas and criticize this. Why are you spending money on that? Why are you venerating an image and so forth? And thereby criticize what we value, criticize ourselves. And then, of course, in terms of the Dharma and the views of the Dharma, there'll be many people in society who don't have much understanding, but nevertheless will happily criticize, or if they do have some understanding, still criticize. So to be in such a situation is quite likely, and you may well have some experience of this. So therefore, how should one respond? Because it is something that you hold dear that is being criticized, and you're likely to think unfairly or unjustly, you are likely to have an emotional response. So being the practice of patience, we've seen in 63 verses thus far, that one should not respond in kind. And the third line makes clear how we should not respond. My getting angry makes no sense. Because again, this is being presented in a way that I think we can relate to, which is that when something that we value greatly is criticized or harmed or even destroyed, one will have an emotional response. And here we're being guided against getting angry. And again, bearing in mind that this term anger is very broad, should be understood in a very broad way, from frustration and annoyance all the way up to rage. So here, we shouldn't respond in kind. We shouldn't respond with our own harsh words or our own aggressive action. We shouldn't even criticize those who criticize what we hold dear. My getting angry makes no sense. So this then is stating clearly to us that it is illogical for us to respond in a way that is contrary to the intent of the Dharma. If we are standing up for the Dharma, but acting in a way contrary to the meaning of it, that really makes no sense at all. Rather, we should respond in a way that is concordant, harmonious, in accordance with the meaning of the Dharma. Here, drawing on what we've looked at up to this point, we remind ourselves that beings have no free will. This person right now is clearly under the control of their afflictions. Hence, they are engaging in a destructive behavior, whether verbal or physical, because they are under the control of their afflictions. and thereby are creating obstacles in relation to what could be of so much benefit to them. By criticizing, perhaps acting in a destructive or physically violent manner towards representations of the Dharma, this creates obstacles within them for later the Dharma having a positive impact on them. Recognizing this, that they have no free will, they're under the control of their afflictions, they are deluded, their mind is afflicted, and they are thereby making their situation far worse. Thinking like that, compassion should arise towards them. And then with a compassionate heart, one will be able to respond in a skillful manner, guided by kindness and gentleness and tenderness towards this suffering being before you. In this way, it's not that one is merely not getting angry, but one is responding in a way that is in accordance with the very meaning of the Dharma that one values so. The final line, as the Buddhas and so forth have not been harmed. So maybe read them together. My getting angry makes no sense, as the Buddhas and so forth have not been harmed. This then, another way to express this, is that should someone either physically act in a physical manner to destroy statues, stupas, and the Holy Dharma, or criticize, revile statues, stupas, and the Holy Dharma, they actually cannot cause them real harm or any harm, because what they represent are the three jewels. And the three jewels cannot be harmed by physical action or by speech, because the Dharma itself, the Dharma jewel, and the minds and the beings in which it abides, the holy beings such as Buddhas and foe destroyers and the Arya Bodhisattvas, they cannot be harmed by beings' behavior, verbal or physical behavior, because these beings have abandoned the afflictions together with their seeds. So therefore, the holy beings, who are the representatives of the Sangha jewel and the Buddhas, the Buddha jewel, as well as the Dharma jewel which abides on their continuum, cannot be harmed by someone's behavior, physical or verbal behavior. Therefore, whilst this person may be harming the physical representations of the three jewels themselves are not being harmed. So therefore, holding this in mind, we should rather respond in a way that is following the example of how Buddhas and Bodhisattvas themselves would respond in such an occasion. They would respond with kindness, with compassion for this suffering being. It's completely illogical, makes no sense for us to be self-righteous on their behalf. Rather, we should follow their example and act like they would. So if we either recall historical events or we imagine temples and stupas being destroyed, this will lead to an emotional response within us. Because again, something that we value dearly is being destroyed and being done so intentionally. So we can imagine in meditation this happening and our emotional response, and then we can use this as an opportunity to cultivate patience within. Use it as an opportunity to train our mind how to skillfully respond in times when our afflictions are arising, our emotions are arising. In this illustration here, or the situation here rather, in this situation here, we recognize that these physical structures are representations of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, and representations perhaps of the qualities within their mind. So we should take that then as inspiration to respond in a way similar to how they would. We should emulate the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas in how we respond. So Buddhas and Bodhisattvas would immediately recognize that the beings who are criticizing them or who are acting in a destructive way towards their representations, statues and stupas and so forth, are under the control of the afflictions. And therefore, they are suffering, and they are creating the causes to suffer ever more. And they are creating obstacles to engaging later in the Dharma themselves, and thereby cultivating the causes for freedom themselves. So immediately then, we can, through this recollection, we can generate compassion for deluded beings. So this is our first response. Again, by imagining how Buddhas and Bodhisattvas would respond, we emulate them and generate compassion for the objects of their care, of the objects of the care of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Secondly, we recognize that this person or persons engaging in this destructive physical verbal behavior are, again, clearly under the influence of the afflictions. And we use this recognition to strengthen our determination to gain freedom from the afflictions. We see, again, in our meditation, we recognize the destructive role that the afflictions are playing through people, how they speak and how they act. And we use this to strengthen our determination. I have to abandon the afflictions within myself. So these two together, compassion for the afflicted and strengthening our determination to gain freedom from the afflictions ourselves, is the way that we should respond to harmful situations, in all harmful situations. And in this way, instead of acting in a way similar to how others are, in an afflicted manner, we rather act in a way that is in accordance with what we value, the teachings of the Buddha. This means this challenging circumstance leads to the accumulation of great virtue and our ongoing progression towards the attainment of Buddhahood ourselves. So this then is how we should respond. Respond in a way similar to how Buddhas and Bodhisattvas would. Embrace, and then for ourselves, we should embrace challenging opportunities, whatever they may be, such as these, embrace them as an opportunity to be of benefit to those who are suffering, and in that way help those immediately in the short term, and by spiritually developing, through cultivating these virtuous minds, progress towards our long-term goal of Buddhahood for the sake of others. And then the 65th verse, one's spiritual teacher, loved ones, friends, and so forth being harmed is, as in the manner shown before, from multiple causes. Perceiving this will counteract anger. So the verse we just looked at, in the first line, it mentioned things that we value, and therefore, if they are criticized or harmed, we are going to have an emotional response, a negative response. So in the verse we've just looked at, or statues, stupas, and the holy Dharma. Similar theme, now in the 65th verse, but here it is in relation to our spiritual teacher, our loved ones, such as our parents and our family, as well as our friends. And friends here, one's general friends in society, but also think specifically of one's fellow Dharma friends, and so forth. So this is the community that we feel a part of, the community that we value. So there'll be our spiritual leader within that community, our spiritual brothers and sisters, as well as then as our dear family. So when they are harmed, then we are likely again to have an emotional response. So this is a similar verse to the previous one, but here we're looking at our spiritual family as well as our actual family. Again, the way to respond in a challenging circumstance such as this, where one's spiritual teacher, where one's fellow religious practitioners, where one's family are criticized or harmed in some way, we need to respond not in an afflicted way, but with genuine patience, with a mind that stays undisturbed in the face of such an adversity. And the way to do so now to the third line, is as in the manner shown before, from multiple causes. So we recognize that this person who's acting in this unskillful way through what they're saying or doing is under the control of their afflictions and their previously accumulated karma. So despite wanting happiness, this person is acting in a way that is contrary to their wish, to their actual wish, which is to achieve happiness. And they are doing so because they are under the control of their karma and afflictions, and thereby are actually creating the causes for suffering, not for happiness, despite what they yearn for. Moreover, so a further way to read the same third line, as is shown before for multiple causes, those who are now being harmed, so one's spiritual teacher, loved ones, friends, and so forth, they are experiencing the ripening result of their own previously accumulated non-virtuous karma. So what is happening now is a result of karma they themselves have accumulated in the past. That karma has met its ripening conditions, that's all. So therefore, that they are experiencing the ripening conditions of the karma they themselves accumulated previously is not surprising, it's not unfair or unjust. This is karma playing itself out. And this was presented earlier in the chapter, in the 25th verse. And I'll read the verse. All faults of afflictions and every kind of non-virtue all arise from the force of causes and conditions. They do not exist under their own control independently. So I'll read the 25th verse again. All faults of afflictions and every kind of non-virtue all arise from the force of causes and conditions. They do not exist under their own control independently. Still with the third line, so we have here, is as in the manner shown before. So here Shantideva is referencing to the verses he's covered already. So I've referenced the 25th, but also now reference the 45th and 46th. So the 45th verse, the spiritually immature have no wish to suffer, yet are attached to the causes of suffering. Thus, as harm arises due to own faults, why be furious with others? So in the 45th verse, it makes clear that whilst one wants to attain happiness, because of one's afflictions, one keeps creating causes that actually lead to suffering. Therefore, why be upset when one experiences the ripening results of the causes oneself has created? Why be upset at others? Why blame others when one is merely experiencing the ripening effects of karma oneself has accumulated? And then the 46th verse. For example, just like the guardians of hell and the forest of sword leaves are produced by my own karma, with whom or what should I be angry? So in that illustration, maybe I'll read it again. For example, just like the guardians of hell and the forest of sword leaves are produced by my own karma, with whom or what should I be angry? So this illustration shows that what we encounter and how we are treated is not something independent of the causes we have created, but comes about independence on the causes we've created. So therefore, the situations we find ourselves in is not random good or bad luck, but has come about independence on the cause we've created. So why are we angry at others when we are merely experiencing our own karma? The third and fourth line. So the third is as in the manner shown before for multiple causes. So this is referencing what we've been looking at thus far. And then the final line, the fourth line, perceiving this will counteract anger. So there are a couple of ways to respond to situations such as this, but we can take it very generally to other situations too. So here specifically in relation to when the community that we value, whether it's our spiritual family or our birth family, that how to respond, as well as we could use this way in other circumstances. That firstly, we recognize in terms of what we are experiencing, we have no valid basis to blame anyone else or to criticize or be angry at others when merely this is the ripening of karma we ourselves have accumulated. This then should be recognized, and as in terms of strengthening our commitment to not accumulate non-virtue. Secondly, taking the perspective of those who are, not taking the perspective, but looking at those who are causing the harm and recognizing they have no free will. They are under the control of their afflictions. They want to be happy. Their mind is overwhelmed by their afflictions, and therefore they are acting under the control of their afflictions and trying to push away whatever it is they think is causing them harm. Hence, they are acting in this unkind way, this unskillful way. They are suffering now, and they are creating the causes for further suffering. And then, with that recollection, based on our previous meditations, compassion for this person will arise. So these are two responses. One in relation to ourselves, recognizing this is merely the ripening of karma I've accumulated, no point blaming anyone, I just need to refrain from accumulating further non-virtue. And then in relation to the person who's causing the harm, recognize they are suffering. They want to be happy, but they are suffering now and creating the causes for further suffering, and thereby give rise to compassion. So these two ways, by perceiving these two ways, will counteract our anger. So that's the fourth line. And furthermore, we can also bear in mind that if we respond in the ordinary way, which is with anger, standing up for perhaps our teacher or our spiritual community that are being derided and criticized, all we are doing by responding with anger or unkind words is creating further causes for our own suffering. And we are also no different really from those who are acting unkindly, in that they are under the control of their afflictions, and if we respond in an afflicted manner, we too are under the control of their afflictions. So in the 64th and 65th verses, what you are hearing are reasons not to get angry, to not respond in an afflicted manner. These reasons that have been covered here are not anything new, in that they've been presented previously or thus far already in this chapter. So as in the manner shown before. So the reasons have already been presented. What is new, though, is the circumstances. Tonight, in these two verses, the triggers for our potential anger is when something that we hold as dear, the objects of our spiritual community, so whether it's our spiritual teacher, fellow practitioners, statues, stupas, holy texts, and so forth, as well as our families, this is what's new, the trigger for a potential afflicted response. What is not new is the way to counteract that, how to skillfully deal with the situation. So I want to point this out right now, because the key takeaway is, whatever challenging circumstance you find yourself in, the many reasons this chapter is presenting on how to deal with that circumstance can be applied. So therefore, train and keep training in these various lines of reasoning, and then by becoming ever more habituated in meditation to them, you'll be able to apply them in all circumstances in your life. So what we've looked at tonight, in terms of the countermeasures, the antidotes that we can apply when we find ourselves in emotional situations where the afflictions are arising within us, is to remind ourselves that we are experiencing our own karma. This merely is the ripening of our own karma. That's all it is. It's nothing special. We're living in an environment and we're interacting with others, all of which has come about in dependence on karma. This is just a further expression of that. And I express it in this way because if we think like this, it will calm our mind, in that what we are experiencing, good or bad, isn't anything worth getting overly excited about. It's just the ripening of causes created in the past. And that helps to give one mental space. We are not taking it too personally. It's merely causes, meeting ripening conditions, and their arising. Secondly, one becomes aware of the role of the afflictions. So in particular, when one is encountering hardships in dependence on our relations with others, we can quite easily recognize the role the afflictions are playing in this person who's acting unkindly towards us or to what we value. There we can see the fault of the afflictions. Secondly, I've just mentioned our karma. Because this is a suffering situation, we know this karma came about in dependence on our afflictions. It's non-virtuous, contaminated karma. Therefore, we also recognize the role the afflictions played, not just in the mind of the person who's acting unkindly, but also for ourselves previously when we accumulated this karma. And if we are feeling the rise of the afflictions within us, this is the third way we see the afflictions causing harm. This then points us to the finger of blame. It's only at the afflictions. It's not at those who are subjected to them, controlled by them. So therefore, in our response to the hardships we encounter, whatever they may be, but these illustrations are in terms of what we value being harmed, look at the role of karma, look at the role of afflictions. And if you've been meditating on these points for a while, this will serve to give rise to compassion towards the suffering being before you. It will also give you a strength of mind not to act under the influence of the afflictions. Even if compassion isn't arising, at least if you recognize the danger that the afflictions in your own mind play, you can refrain from responding under their influence. Then you can also take heart in reminding yourself of, in such a circumstance, how would the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas and our spiritual teachers respond? These beings are our role models, those in whose footsteps we follow. They would only respond with kindness and with care, no matter the harm they receive from others. Therefore, as their student, the student of the Buddha, as a student of our spiritual teachers, let me try to emulate their example and not respond in an afflicted manner, but with a compassionate heart for suffering beings. Let me respond in such a way. And then in your reflection, you can remind yourself that whilst I'm experiencing the ripening result of my own non-virtue by being in this difficult circumstance, I am actually, by following the example of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and my spiritual teachers, I am transforming this hardship into the path to enlightenment. This means that I am experiencing the ripening result of non-virtuous karma, and that now is exhausted. And that's something to rejoice in. Moreover, because I'm not responding in an afflicted manner, but rather with patience and with compassion, I am creating the causes for Buddhahood. And this is how we transform hardships into the path to enlightenment. Instead of responding in the normal way, the afflicted way, whereby we would exhaust past non-virtue and create new non-virtuous karma, rather we have transformed this non-virtue into the path to enlightenment. Thinking like this then should give a great strength of mind, because we recognize we are both purifying and creating causes for Buddhahood. So what we are seeing here, Shantideva is presenting many reasons for us to learn and to reflect on, to role play in meditation, how to respond in our actual lived experiences, things we've encountered in the past or will in the future. And like a boxer training how to counteract blows, we are training our mind so that when we do experience these challenging circumstances, by being well trained, we will transform them into the path to enlightenment. That brings us then to the 66th verse. if sentient beings are harmed by both animate beings and inanimate objects, why single out and take exception to beings? Therefore, it follows to be patient with harm. So again, I explain firstly the first two lines. Of course, the Tibetan expresses itself in ways which aren't clear. The translation is fine, but I'll repeat what he said, because if you have other texts, maybe they are more literal. So the first one is, I translated as if sentient beings. So this would otherwise be translated as embodied beings, so those with body. So if sentient beings, if embodied beings, are harmed by both animate beings, there the Tibetan is literally that with mind, and inanimate objects, the Tibetan again is that without mind. So again, I then explained what this means. So animate beings, those with mind, sentient beings, inanimate objects, so those without mind. And this refers to things made from material form, knives, stones, this kind of thing. What it comes down to is that we are harmed by both types. So we see in the first line, sentient beings are harmed by both. Harmed by those which are animate beings, so those with mind, and inanimate objects, that without mind. Now the third line, why single out and take exception to beings? So this is pointing out the inconsistency in our response. If we are harmed by something physical, something material rather, such as a stone, we have a very different response than when we are harmed by something with mind, so a being. When on one level, there is no difference if we are harmed by a stone, I don't know, we kick it, or we harmed by a being. Because in both cases, we experience pain. So at that level, there is no difference. Yet, we hold the one accountable, the being, and the other, the inanimate object, the stone, we don't hold accountable. So why do we respond to them differently in this inconsistent manner? And therefore, the verse concludes, therefore it follows to be patient with harm. Because as was just mentioned in the previous two verses, beings do not have free will. And this is what, due to our ignorance, we do not recognize. So we are more understanding of something inanimate because we don't think it has free will. But we get angry, we blame beings because without a delusion, we think they have free will, not recognizing they are under the control of their karma and afflictions. There's two links to what we've looked at previously, which is the discussion between when we are harmed by something inanimate. So let's say we're beaten by a stick or attacked with a weapon. We would afterwards say, yes, I got angry with the person who attacked me, not with the stick or the weapon, because I recognize that the knife or the stick was wielded by a person. Therefore, I'm angry at the person because the stick or the knife had no free will. It was under the control of the person. So therefore, my anger with the person is justified. But this makes the mistake of thinking that this person was acting with their own free will, not dependent on any causes. Whereas the reality, they were under the control of their afflictions. These afflictions are deeply habituated to, and therefore, under their influence, under their control, this person attacked you. So there really is no difference between lack of freedom between the wielded weapon and the wielder of the weapon. Neither have any free will or agency or autonomy. This is what we need to recognize, and recognizing this will allow us to be patient with harm. By doing this reflection, looking deeply at one's own way of thinking, and taking that understanding and applying it to what we observe in others, we come to recognize that the cause of all harm is the afflictions, both in terms of the non-virtuous karma accumulated, as well as the acting out of this karma through the afflictions that are present in the being's mind, ripening that karma. What we need to come to really recognize that the source of all suffering that each and every being has ever experienced is the afflictions. If we particularly want to blame something, it is the afflictions, and afflictions alone, that are to be blamed. Not ourselves, not others, so not people, not beings, but the afflictions. So blaming the afflictions makes sense, but we need to be clear. It's the afflictions and the afflictions alone which are to be blamed, not the beings who are overwhelmed under the control of the afflictions. That we need to be clear of. Secondly, we need to be clear in terms of how we express that blame. Because the problem with using a word like blame is that it usually comes with afflictions themselves. So if we are responding in a negative way, in an afflicted way, then this is hypocritical. We ourselves are acting in a way that further perpetuates our own suffering, both now and in the future. If we really are blaming the afflictions as a source of suffering, we cannot be creating further afflictions, strengthening our afflictions by blaming. Rather, we need to respond in a non-afflicted way. In other words, respond with kindness and care to all those under the control of afflictions. Whether the afflictions are in a non-manifest manner, or whether they are manifest, the person is enraged, we should hold them with kindness and care. This is how to respond to the afflictions. And whether we are thinking of people other than ourselves, or ourselves when we have been under the control of the afflictions, we should respond with kindness and care. Hold our afflicted selves, as well as other afflicted beings, with kindness and care. This is how we cultivate the antidote to the afflictions, and it needs to be done again and again, taking real examples that you've lived with, as well as situations you expect to find yourself in, and think through those situations. Make it clear to yourself that it's the afflictions that cause harm in every instance, and therefore not to blame others, not to blame ourselves, but to ensure we strive to gain freedom from the afflictions and relate towards ourselves and others with kindness, care, love, and compassion. This is how Bodhisattvas train, and these are our role models. We should follow their example. The antidotes to anger are love and compassion. So love and compassion are what makes genuine patience possible. So we've been looking at many reasons here throughout this chapter to cultivate patience. These require a foundation of valuing others, of seeing others as dear and as important. And this enhanced with a wish for all beings, wherever they are, to abide in happiness free of suffering, makes genuine patience possible. So there are many techniques presented so as to train the mind in patience. By you doing so repeatedly over a sustained period, you'll become ever more habituated to this way of thinking. So I've spoken a lot tonight about the faults of the afflictions. And when you recognize that all your suffering comes from afflictions, you'll have the strength of mind not to come under their influence. That then is the basis to recognize others too are suffering because of their afflictions. And when you see, despite your best wishes, the afflictions continuing to arise, if you can be accepting of your predicament, compassionate with yourself, you will be able to be understanding of others too. Recognizing the arisal of the afflictions is merely the coming together of causes and conditions, as we looked at earlier tonight. And it's just this habituation expressing itself, whether it's expressing itself within your own mind or the mind of others. This understanding, if taken to heart, will help calm our mind in challenging circumstances. And this understanding can be enhanced by the recognition that if I follow the afflictions, I will accumulate the causes for further suffering. I will accumulate non-virtue and perpetuate my suffering. Whereas, if I can respond in a skillful manner, recognizing either the potential for the arisal of the affliction or the arisal of it, and counteracting it, I will thereby be creating the causes that will enhance my spiritual development. So, in our lives, in our daily experience, we have countless opportunities to practice patience. Practicing patience means ensuring that our mind does not come under the influence of the afflictions. So whether we are sitting somewhere quietly like we are now, or whether we are engaged in activity, whether we are with others, or whether we are alone, our mind is active. And it can all too easily come under the influence of the afflictions. Again, we can be with others or we can be alone. We can be in activity or we can be sitting quietly, and our mind can be negative, complaining. So recognize the afflictions. Do not run after them, follow them, but rather recognize the problems, my unhappiness, my complaining, isn't due to who I'm with or what I'm doing. It's the arisal of the afflictions. I'm not going to follow them. I'm rather going to turn my mind back to virtue, embrace virtue, remind myself that whomever I'm with or I'm thinking of wants to be happy. May they have happiness, and generates thereby love and compassion for them. If we train our mind in this way again and again, holding others as dear, thinking of their good qualities, wanting them to be happy, recognizing they too, like me, are controlled by afflictions. May we all be free. We'll be able to break free from our suffering, change our way of thinking. In particular, train our minds to respond with kindness and care, respond with compassion and gentleness, never with afflictions. And in this way, we will become genuinely patient, open and accepting of ourselves and of others. Then thank you. We can conclude there for tonight, but it's still a few minutes before 8, so if you have questions, then feel free to ask. There's one, Dave.
In regard to causes and conditions, is there ever a first cause, or is it always a first cause?
Is there ever a first cause, or is it always a first cause?
Or is it always causing either virtue or non-virtue, or is it in response to karma or previous causes and conditions? So is it a first cause if we react with a virtuous mind, or is it a first cause if we act with a non-virtuous mind?
No, I'm really not getting it, sorry.
I'm just thinking, are we always in a cycle of reacting to previous conditions?
Okay. It's really a good question, because when we talk about this, causes and effects, it sounds like we're talking in the singular. The truth is, this cycle of dependency, which is the case, is really a very broad and intricate web of interdependency. So we talk from a cause comes a result. So it seems like from one comes the other. But it is far more intricate. This web of interdependency is far more intricate. So this is, when we look at it, we can recognize there is a multiplicity of interactions going on. So there may be something dominant, as in a dominant cause, with other interacting causes coming together. So things coming from the past, as well as what's been created anew. But it's really a multiplicity, a web of interdependency. So it is this continuous cycle of interdependency. It's not an old thing ripening, exhausted, a new thing created, new one created. It's much more intricate and involved than that. So it's presented in a way that's like that, but it is much broader.
So would that also relate to cessation? Like cessation would be like a collective kind of cessation, or is it insane?
So when we attain the actual cessation, so on the path of seeing, these come about. There is a sequence of cessations that are achieved from a coarser level of affliction that is ceased, progressively down to subtler and subtler levels of afflictions that are ceased. So cessations are gained in relation to them. So the very first level, the coarsest level, are the acquired afflictions together with their seeds. Thereafter, one, over a period of time, eliminates progressively ever subtler levels of innate afflictions together with their seeds. So it is a sequence, it's not of a level. So at a particular level, everything there is stopped. And then goes subtler and subtler and subtler. Okay?
Yeah.